I usually don't do videos this in depth, but I figure this is pretty important. What you're looking at is a silver radio that happened to be my great-grandparents, and I've inherited it because it was in the possession of my great-aunt, who is now moving, great-aunt and uncle who are moving, so they didn't want it anymore. It was in their basement ever since my great-grandparents died in the 80s, so kind of cool. I have the chassis out of it now and it's on my workbench, but the neat thing is it came with its original owner's manual. Let's see, it says, it's out of focus, but it says copyright 1929, Silver Marshall Incorporated. It has all the, that's what it looks like. Model 60. And I'm going to be in the middle of restoring it. So, all that kind of interesting stuff. This stuff is very brittle. And that's the back of the set when it's all put together. Has a nice speaker in it. So it should be a pretty decent sounding set. There's the chassis lineup. Has 4 tuned gang tuning capacitors, so for a TRF set it ought to be actually pretty good. It even has the original envelope that everything came in. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting. Digging into family history a little bit. My mom is very much into genealogy and family tree and stuff like that, and I know that my great-grandparents, when they were first married, lived in an apartment building not far from here on 35th and Stevens Avenue in Minneapolis. My mom looked up the 1930 census, and it turns out that they were living in that building at the time, and actually looking in, here's a picture of that census, and it lists here 3501 Stevens Avenue, and here's my great-grandpa. Their last name was Hopp, H-O-P-P. They misspelled his name. His name was Alvin, but they spelled it Elvin, so it's Alvin, Catherine, and my grandmother, Elaine, who was just a baby at the time. If you go over here, it labels her as 8/12 of a year old. And the interesting thing, one of the reasons why I looked this up, it was very interesting, is the census at the time, this column here, mentions, do the occupants or owners have a radio set? And sure enough, down here it says R. And what do you want to bet? It's that radio set right there. It would have been absolutely brand new at the time. Well, a year old. But it's just also interesting that, you know, I only live probably 8 blocks away from that apartment building. I will keep you posted on more restoration details on this project, and it should be kind of fun. I hope to get it working here fairly soon. I'm just working on the Silver Marshall radio. I've been busy restuffing the capacitor blocks. That's these here. One here, there, and over here. And it doesn't look like I've touched them, but actually I have. It was fairly easy to do. These particular ones, there's enough wire here that I didn't need to desolder anything. All I had to do was bend these tabs back and pull on it, and everything came out in a big lump. Here's what was inside of them. The capacitors are basically potted in tar, and they just slid right out, and I was able to restuff them with the modern equivalents. Those particular ones were a grouping of 3.1 microfarad capacitors. And here's the modern equivalent. So there's 1, 2, 3 stuffed down in there, and there's the common and then the 3 leads for each one. It's an interesting fact that when I first looked at this one, this lead here, and it must have failed really early on, because this lead here I replaced. It was cut off, and someone had put in this replacement, a very old replacement. You can see if it focuses on there. It's a 1930s Cornell capacitor, and obviously it has failed. It's all bulged out and melted, but it was soldered between here and then up over here. It was soldered to the ground because that's what it does. Obviously this had failed very early on, and replaced with this one, which in turn has failed as well. I might save the label on that. It's kind of a cool Art Deco looking label. But other than that, the other thing I discovered, which scared me at first, was this interstage transformer, which goes between the first audio tube, the 27 tube, and the two 45 tubes, the output tubes, had an open primary. And that happens a lot in these older radios. It's such a fine winding. The wire is about as fine as a human hair. And what I ended up doing, I've done this before. I did this on the Brunswick. I figured it's broken, you know, it's already broken, so I can't make it even more busted than it is. So I took the transformer out. It just has tabs on the other side that bend over, so I removed it, peeled back the paper layer, found where the leads attached to the winding, and found the very, very fine bit of wire sticking out that attaches the windings to the actual solder-on leads here, and stripped back found the break. I mean, that's where I've found they fail, is right between the actual coil and where the terminal leads are. So I stripped it back, resoldered it. It has continuity now, and then I sealed it back up with just manila paper. I took some hot glue and, you know, sealed it up, rewrapped the outer casing with it, and also wrote the number that I had found on it for future reference, D270. That's what the original paper said, so I figured I would duplicate that. I've tested all the coils. All the coils seem to be good. These chokes are good. This resistor seems to be okay. Power transformer seems to be okay. All these dropping wire wound resistors seem to be pretty decent, so I think it'll be alright. This is the tuning apparatus. It's all pot metal. One of the problems I know I had with this is because it is pot metal, this joins up with the tuning condenser. Is I slathered it. It was starting to just crack and bulge and do all sorts of nasty stuff, so I slathered it with JB Weld in all the cracks and crevices, let it harden, then I filed it down where it needed to fit, you know, where the stuff needs to fit, and I think it will hold up. I had to do some filing because that has to fit down in that groove there, and it seems to work okay. I did buy some rather thick dial cord. Originally this had kind of a copper braided cable that went from this side around the thing and then back to this side, but that's long gone. It had busted years ago. So I need to find a way to attach one end of the dial cord here, and then the other side goes here. So what I might do is solder on a loop to either tie it off or something. So here's where the old dial cord used to fit. I think they soldered one end of it on in that little groove, but obviously they can't solder synthetic dial cord on, so I'm going to take a Dremel and clean this out, and then I think what I'm going to try is I have some brass tubing that's rather small. It looks bigger than it is because it's farther away, but I'm going to cut a little channel, or make that channel that you can see a little bit deeper and wider, and fit a chunk of it down in there so I have somewhere to tie off the dial cord, and I will see if that works. Okay, well, I took some of that brass tubing, and you can see I soldered an eyelet on there with enough space on this end for a knot, and then this end will wrap around the screw. So it has enough clearance to pass by all this stuff too, if you were to put it on here. You'll notice that it doesn't interfere with anything there. Well, there we go. I think I have it all put together. Things are holding. I hate this thing, doesn't focus. Anyway, it seems to do what it needs to do, nice and smoothly, from stopping point to stopping point. There. So, time to put it back together. So here's the tuning gang, and I've taken it loose from the chassis. So this part has to go down in that hole and through, and then the shaft goes on here over that hole right there, and it turns it. So here we go. Right in this area was another tar block capacitor, the main filter capacitor. That I have actually have a part in the other area, in the other room, and it actually came apart pretty good. I'll show you that in a bit. Here's the other tar block capacitor, main filter capacitor. It fits in this tin can and then it was riveted to the chassis, but now it will be screwed on. Here's the ugly tar block. I just took a torch on low, and heated up real nice, and then grabbed some with a towel, and then you grab it by its hair and just yank on it, and it just kind of slides out. It really stunk too. Yeah, so not much use anymore. I did for fun test this on my ICO capacitor tester, and yes, it was definitely leaky and useless. So okay, here's the schematic for the silver radio, and you're looking at the basically the filter capacitor for the radio, and you notice it has a couple of different sections there. It has a 2 microfarad, 2 microfarad, 4, and 1. Those were in that tin can that I showed earlier that I pulled the guts out of, and they have colored leads that come out of them. There's white, green, blue, and red. And I ordered on eBay some colored wires here to restuff it. And here I have built up a, it looks very funny, but it's going to go back into that tin can. The 4 sections, there's a 4, 2 2s, and a 1. So I'll solder the equivalent wires onto them, and then they go to various parts in the radio. Here's some leftovers, the blue one, the red one, green one, and black is ground. So okay, here's the capacitor all wired up with all of its leads that will go to the various connections in the radio. The only thing left to do now is to put it back in the tin can. and then mount the tin can back where it goes, which is right in this area right here. Well, there it is all back together. Almost as good as original. All soldered back together. Next to mount it back in the radio. Well, I've got everything back together. Looks a little bit haphazard, but a lot of this old point-to-point wiring is like that. Capacitor block is back in with all this new wiring going to where it should be going. I did replace a few resistors here that were quite a bit out of tolerance. These two are okay. This one is supposed to be a 2 megohm resistor, but it's actually reading about 4, so I'll probably replace that. And after that, I think we're pretty much done underneath. On top, you can see the nameplate is where it should be again, all held in with the nice screws. I need to solder on these connections here. I had to take them loose when I put the tuning apparatus back in, the pulley system. This capacitor here is now out of circuit. I clipped the wires off. I'm just going to leave it there. And its replacement is actually hidden up under down here. You can barely see it, and then I just ran the wires where they should go. Well, I have my tube tester set up to test the 24 tubes, the RF tubes in the radio, and I have one of them in there, and it's kind of disappointing. They're pretty worn out. I guess Great-Grandpa listened to this radio a lot. Not much life left in that one. This one's not much better. This is probably one of the older ones of the 4 of them. This is actually a globe style tube, so yeah. Next, here's the third one. About the same. Yeah. And the fourth one. Yeah, they're all about the same. It may still work, sort of. It probably won't have much strength. I don't think it'll be completely dead, but... Okay, here's our 80 rectifier, and here's one section of it. Seems pretty good and strong. And go to the other section. Not quite as strong, but still okay. So I think that one will work alright. Here's our number 27 tube, which is used as the detector, and it tests pretty strong, so that one should be good. Okay, it's about 2 weeks later. Had a lot going on, so I didn't do much on it, but I skipped ahead a little bit and replaced that bad resistor underneath and got my 245 output tubes. So all the tubes are in. There's a good 80, the 245s, the 4 24s, and the 27. So it's all complete. I cheated a little and brought it up on a Variac, and it actually does work. So I'm just going to turn it on, I guess, and see what happens again.
Yes, every MSNBC show. Does he know you're cheating on it? 20 minutes after the hour, this portion of the 70 Miller Show brought to you by My Casper Mattress, Prison Boys Casper Mattress. Daylight savings about
It's actually amazingly accurate, considering that this shrank a little bit because of what it's made out of.
It's also my cat's favorite mattress. Well, there you go. I would make a joke. Who are these kings? Revelation chapter 2, verse...
Landing port, your pilot in the center. So imagine a drone, but that's actually powered by someone in the middle.
Put you on No Chill Friday. Thank you. Hope you are well. Hope you've had a very, very good
a lot of that buzzing and stuff will go away once I put the all the shielding back on. This radio is very, very reliant on shielding to keep it quiet, which is actually one of the reasons why it's so good.
64250 I think what we share is usually much
And for being a TRF set, it's actually very selective.
As well. And we should be just like with our Jewish
Stations that are really close to each other, as you can hear, they don't...
because look at the people. Share. Then we can be only to live about with.
You can see how close those are. They don't bleed on top of each other, which is kind of notorious for what TRFs do, at least really cheap ones, is they're not very selective, and you get stations that bleed and run into each other, so you get two stations playing at once. But this one, being that it has 4 stages, I think helps, and it's actually a very high quality set. I can tell even with the speaker out of the cabinet, it's going to have a very full sound. Let's see.
Manny Lagos. Hope he's okay. It'll be the Loons in San Jose to play the Earthquakes tomorrow night.
So this is your on-off tuning volume. This switch here is a kind of a tone control. When I flick it, you'll notice the treble gets boosted.
They are back at it on Saturday night at Target Center. Our coverage begins at 6 with
So that's what that's for.
Pregame 6:30.
And on the back, it has an actual phono input. It says in the manual it's supposed to be for a phonograph. And actually, Silver Marshall did sell a phonograph adapter for it, so you could, hook a really old horseshoe pickup up to your, wind-up Victrola, and then plug it into the back of this and use it as a audio amplifier. So I guess the next step is to, wipe it down a little bit, I guess, and put all the shielding back together and put it in the cabinet. Well, here's the Model 60 silver radio. That was my great-grandfather's, all put back together. The cabinet is in pretty rough shape, but everything, got all the tubes, and everything's back together. So, give it a little test run.
I think impeachment is mandatory. Obviously, the Mueller report, verifies all of the reporting that we've been seeing so far. If that happens, and these various congressional committees, the Judiciary Committee, Intelligence, and so on, they come up with similar evidence, he has to be impeached. I mean, there isn't any question about it. This is a matter of the rule of law. It's not a matter of convenience. We don't impeach presidents because it's convenient.
But Jim Delaney, if you're listening, which you're probably not, but maybe we can send him the podcast, please consider Minneapolis, Minnesota, and even St. Paul when it comes to the Big Ten Conference Tournament.
So, if you're going to ask me about, both one of those guys, that's not my area of expertise. But what I will tell you is,
I don't know how, sir, if there's anything else you'd like to ask.
A study every single year to look at the safety of the vaccine schedule. Service
2018 to save $10 off your first prescription. That's GoGoMeds.com.
People confuse evidence with proof. There's an abundance of evidence, for instance, that the Trump campaign cooperated.
That's 950, Air America 950, or used to be called that. The other really strong station around here is WCCO, which comes in really well.
Access and pulled cabinets that allow them to
Right here.
recovery. We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit.
Being a TRF of this age, it doesn't have automatic volume control, so you do have to adjust it with 2 hands, otherwise you can get blasted. But here's the back. You can't really see it very well. But everything is encased inside the shielding. So, yeah. There we go. '1929 Silver Marshall or Silver Radio.